Emad Kiyaei is the executive director of the American-Iranian Council, and Ali Heinanen is a senior fellow at Harvard University, and he is joining us from Boston this evening. Mr. Kiyaei, I will begin with you. What should we make of the fact that the Iranian foreign minister has now left and is headed back to Iran? Is that posturing or a bad omen?
Well, I think it's two issues. One is that it just follows his bilateral meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry. And I'm sure there was some details that were discussed in that meeting that may have required further discussions back in Tehran. And in addition, as you know, that Dr. Zarif's technical expert, Mr. Salehi, who heads the nuclear experts team, is unfortunately not able to accompany him in Vienna. So there will be further consultations back in Tehran, and knowing that the negotiations will go past the deadline of June 30th indicates that Dr. Zarif needs further clarity on what he can do.
Mr. Heinanen, what do you make of the fact that Mr. Zarif has left now and is headed back to Tehran?
I think Iran is now in front of a very, very important decision. Some of them are technical in nature, and some of them are more policy nature. First of all, they have to agree to the final parameters of the enrichment program. That's, in particular, the people want to hear what is their view on the enrichment R&D, because this will be key to the breakout time, which is one of the concerns of the P5+1. And then it's the policy decision. The policy decisions are two types, I see. First is that what would be the IAEA access rights, particularly to the military sites, military workshops, which are all essential for the verification of the agreement and to make sure that Iran complies with its undertakings. And this compliance also has then effect on the sanctions relief, how people are going to package this in such a way that the sanctions relief is based on the performance. And these are important questions, and these are fundamental in order to reach the agreement.
Mr. Kiyaei, is too much being made of this being negotiations between the U.S. and Tehran as opposed to the P5+1 and Tehran? Is the U.S. playing too large of a deal in this negotiation?
Well, within the P5+1, the most powerful player is the United States. We know that these negotiations started in 2003 and failed in 2005 because the EU powers then could not get a green light from Washington. So America's involvement in these P5+1 talks are very paramount. And of course, the bilateral relations between US and Iran have been marred for so many years, and of course play into these negotiations because there's a great deal of mistrust between these two countries. And of course, there are other geopolitical issues that each P5+1 member has his own interest in.
And when you talk about mistrust, you also are talking about the Russians, the role that they play. Is it surprising to you that their role has been so quiet since that initial round of talks back in April?
Well, they have actually been pretty engaged, but I think that as we go closer to the final deal, and since we've made some progress through the interim deal first and now the political framework, and many of these issues have been resolved. What it comes down to is, as Oli has mentioned, partially how does this sanctions regime look like, where we can be removed, and a major player in here is the United States. And of course, we have to look at how does Iran correspond with those liftings of sanctions with its own verification, monitoring, and transparency issues for its nuclear program.
Mr. Heinanen, aside from the fact that it sounds bad politically, I have heard experts say that the longer the clock ticks, the worse it is for Iran. Is that true in your opinion?
Not really. I think that, let's now look this next 2 days and see what comes back from Tehran when Mr. Zarif goes there. And certainly when the negotiations drag this long as these have been, it causes some additional complications in making the positions, but I'm still a little bit optimistic. Maybe it slips a couple of days, but in 1 week time we might be much wiser.
We had a guest on this same program just last night who said that no deal would be disastrous, and if the hawks in Congress wanted to invade Tehran, we would be looking at a force of 1 million soldiers and a very costly war that would make Iraq look like child's play. Do you agree?
If I look it from my perspective, from technical person and all the history of non-proliferation which I have behind, I don't think that the next things only option is military intervention or invasion. There are some other ways and means still to sort this out, means which are in between. So I would not, see this as that now we are in this situation where either we have a war or we have a peace.
Mr. Kiyaei, one of the things, and we were talking about this as well, that we learned after the U.S. invasion of Iraq was that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction and was posturing because he feared his neighbors in the Middle East. Is this new red line that we are hearing from Iran's supreme leader, is that political posturing to play to the base back home, or is it, I guess, calling the bluff of the United States, trying to make it seem like Tehran is in a much tougher position than it really is?
Well, it's a little bit of both. Let me just mention that you're referring to Ayatollah Khamenei's red line that just came out.
Where he says he wants the sanctions to be lifted first.
Exactly. I tell you why this is the case. The relationship between US and Iran, obviously, we've mentioned, has been troubled. And every time there's been a promise from the world powers, Western powers, that there will be some sanctions relief or removal, we've seen that they've backtracked on that. So Ayatollah Khamenei is trying to make sure that Iran's national interest is kept at bay, and that the Iranians are guaranteed that these sanctions relief will occur. Because as you've seen throughout this negotiations, Iran has kept to this end of its bargain and has made major concessions of its nuclear file. Are we seeing that from the world powers? Well, it's yet to be seen. And I think here these red lines are in a place to, yes, give Iran more power in the negotiations, but also to indicate that Iran is serious about its own end of the commitment as long as the world powers reciprocate.
Emad Kiyaei, the executive director of the American-Iranian Council, and Ali Einonen is a senior fellow at Harvard. Gentlemen, I thank you both for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having us.